Hello, everyone. I'm going to start up here so that I have this microphone, and then Father Gans will come down. But welcome to our November night school class, which you'll notice it's a week earlier than normal because next week is Thanksgiving, which is hard to believe. This last week for a few nights, my sisters and my mom and I all traveled to New York City for my mom's 70th birthday, which was so fun. I think my parents are actually on the Zoom calling in from Texas. But I was just thinking it's amazing I could wake up in Portland and then go to sleep in New York City, and a few days later be touring around New York City and then sleeping in my bed in Portland again. So it's incredible how we're able to travel from one place to another so quickly. And I tried to help us travel to Germany with the food theme for tonight in honor of our guest for this evening, Edith Stein. So for those of you who are not here in person, we were over here noshing on some pretzels and German mustard and sausage and German wines. So it's kind of fun to have a little theme to try out. Welcome to everyone here in person. Welcome everyone online. I will be passing around this sheet for you to sign in, as we'll have some updates to send out tomorrow, as well as the recording of the class. And if you're online, I'm going to be trying to make the best picture and angle with a new video camera. So feel free to comment in the comments area if the lighting is off or the sound is off. We're trying to just continue to perfect that experience for you guys that are online. So welcome. So glad you're here. And Father Gans will come up or come down and get us going.
I think it's probably a good thing the camera moved from over there to here straight on, because then the big bald spot on the back of my head doesn't shine on the camera. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. What if we just took a moment to recognize that as we are here, as Mary said, there's also a congregation of people that are online. And I like to think of that as a practice of the communion of saints, where we live in this world and we have no idea how many angelic presences are here, and we just don't think that's possible. So we assume, because we can't think it's possible, that they don't exist or have never been sent to be the friends of humans. They are created beings like we are. They aren't divine, but they are of a higher order of being than we. So perhaps as dogs might look up to humans and say they are a higher order of being. Problem with humans is we're just constantly obviously present, whereas angels have more courtesy and we don't notice how much they are helping us, and they sort of credit us with great accomplishments when maybe they were really a part of it. So to feel a connection to people online is kind of a practice of they're here, and I hope they feel that we're kind of with them. Let's take a moment to pray. Come, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and awaken us, activate our soul's powers to be present to this evening and to each other with greater fullness of presence, so that we are capable of learning, being deeply affected by profound things, and as always to be inspired by our luminous guest, and in this case, Edith Stein, also known as Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. We offer this evening to you as a work of praise and acknowledgement of your presence, not only here now, but in history. Amen. When people refer to Edith Stein, they often just say Edith Stein because it's shorter. Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross seems long and ponderous. But we shouldn't forget that when she entered the Carmelite Order, she took this name because Teresa of Avila was the first person she'd ever read that finally made sense in relation to who God is and how God works in the world. And even though she had thought deeply about how much of modern thinking and philosophy has foreclosed any ability of the divine to be present inside philosophies, she sensed the wrongness of that. It seemed dishonest. It was refusing to pay attention at important experiences that people clearly had. That the reigning philosophy says, you can't think about that. Those are just, you can't talk about it. So she worked very hard to, at a highly sophisticated academic level, to open our thinking to the possibility that God might actually be real and really good at what he does and working in the world. Isn't that something? So there's a couple of quotes that I just want to open with from a scholar who spent a considerable amount of his younger life doing a doctorate on Edith Stein. These are just a couple of comments he has. It should be stated at the outset that Stein's masterpieces in philosophical theology are rigorous and dense. It is a great feat just to read through one of them in its entirety. She is fierce and difficult because so subtle in her thinking and so insistent that she get onto this thing that she's being led to understand. She's challenging that way. Again, I don't mind calling Edith Stein because it's her born name. And it also captures, echoes her Jewish roots, that she was born a Jew in a Jewish family. And so some scholarly works refer to her as Saint Edith Stein, which sometimes for Jews is overwhelmingly difficult to listen to, because Edith Stein means, no, she belongs to us. And she's part of the story of the extermination of the Jews in Europe. So you keep your saint with the Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, and we'll be happy with Dr. Edith Stein. Thank you very much. But I like the fact by calling Edith Stein, not only it's short, a shortened form, but I like the tension it creates. And when she was canonized, she was called by Pope John Paul II a daughter of Israel and a lover of Christ, to capture both truths about her. Okay? Here's another quote from that same young scholar. Comprehending the human soul is argued to be the most pressing task for theological anthropology today. If the human soul, a concept found in all the great religious traditions of the world, is not taken seriously when asking what it is to be human, then we will end up with inhuman conclusions to our most decisive ethical questions. We talk about the Faber Institute as about cultivation of soul in an age when people don't even know. It's how often, playfully, not to put people on the spot, just said, what is the soul? And they have, the face just goes like this, have no idea how to reply. It doesn't mean they don't have a soul. They're just not used to understanding and being brought into an understanding of it. Edith Stein was hugely committed to that. Okay? Now, a couple of quick things about our biography, and we never spend a lot of time on biography because you can do that. She was born in 1891, 10 years younger than Teilhard de Chardin, who was our guest in the first two sessions of this particular series of the night school. Born in 1891 and died in 1942, exterminated at Auschwitz, Birkenau. She was absolutely a genius. At age 13, she pushed away from Judaism and says, "Not for me." Now remember, and this will come up many times in this, I think tonight, many times. We so often are making a mistake of assuming that our relationship with God and religion are the same thing. Those are two very different things. Religion is an institution created by humans to respond to God, who has made himself known to us. Religions are human institutions. A relationship with God is something that God himself affects through his artistry and courtesy, directly with each person, asking no religious IDs. However frustrating it may be, Jesus was not a Catholic. It's just worth remembering, you know? It's just, and we often trip on that more than we know. So when she pushed away from Judaism, what was going on with her is she, even in her younger life, experienced God in some inchoate way with such a clarity, a pre-articulated clarity in her, that she recognized the dreary and droning on of religious rituals was not it. I sound critical of religion. I am. I gave my whole life, and I will continue to give my whole life to the support of it. But I'm faithfully critical. And I only bring that up to help you be freer in your own thinking about how you sit with God and how religion can sometimes really help you with that, and sometimes really get in the way. Doesn't mean you throw it out. It just means you have to access it at a different point from where it's coming at you. The night school has been always about that, bringing you in through saints and profound people to just drastically open your mind to different ways that the great Christian religion of the world is so vastly bigger than a pew. She shot up through the intellectual world of Germany at the time, which was some of the finest, most articulate and difficult scholarship in the whole world. And she just shot right up. She had only one real problem. She was a woman. And so something that will come up with her often is her having to stand against the norm, because she could hold her own with the most brilliant philosophers of the age in Germany. Easy. And yet she didn't look right. And so even though she's summa cum laude, her famous doctorate on empathy, which is fascinating, it remains one of the greatest works that's ever been done on the idea of empathy. And that was her first shot at scholarship. Wow. Top marks. And then went through her doctoral exams, top marks. But in Germany, you have to get two doctorates. There's the doctorate that says, yeah, I guess you might have something. And then the second one that says, okay, we'll let you join our group. It's called the habilitation doctorate. She did that, but because she was a woman, she was not allowed to teach anywhere. And so, like great saints will do, it doesn't stop them for a second. And she just found other ways to come into the world and share what she had. And one of the ways she did that was by giving many, many talks about education, and especially many deep thinkings about women. and how they are and their importance at the level of being. I would have loved to have a chance to talk with her over coffee about a question that I've wondered about for a long time, and that is the soul, does the soul have gender? How deep does gender go? How deep? And I think the answer to that question is really significant. Is there a base? Is there at the base of gender a common soulness? Or is as deep as you go, there's a woman's soulness and there's a man's soulness, a male and female soulness, that deep, that's genuinely, distinctly rich? I'm not sure. Edith Stein explored these kinds of depths with a greater fierceness than I can muster. So I'll just stick with mustard and call it good. So when she was 31 years old, she was received into the Catholic Church, and it happened when she was at some friend's house, and they happened to have a copy of the autobiography of Teresa of Avila in the house. And she just said, I wonder what this is, picked it up. It's a big fat thing. It's one of the most important books in the history of mysticism on how God actually works with a person, how it actually works, what God, kind of signature God, the kinds of moves God makes when God does a relationship with humans. It's really remarkable piece of work. She sat down and read it through the entire night. And when she woke, well, she didn't go to sleep. But in the morning, maybe around a particularly stiff cup of coffee, she said to herself and maybe to others, finally, this is the truth. And that caused her then to be welcomed into the Catholic Church, and a little bit later into the Carmelite Order, as Teresa of Avila had been a Carmelite, kind of following her, whom she trusted. Again, Edith Stein at 13 would have been called, in our smart little language, agnostic, which gnosko in Greek means that sound inside the verb, gnosko, that sk sound, whenever it's put inside of a Greek verb, means you're supposed to add to the meaning of the verb in the process of. So gnosko doesn't mean to know something. It means to be in the process of knowing something. It means learning. Or we might say becoming acquainted with. So an agnostic, that's the is a privative sound, which means I don't know how to become acquainted with. Haven't foreclosed the journey of knowledge. I just don't know how to start. So my favorite way of speaking of agnostic is this. An agnostic, and I think I mentioned this before with Teilhard, an agnostic means I have been around you long enough to have a sense of who you think God is. The only thing I'm certain of right now is that isn't God. And it's not a being snarky. It just means it does not ring true. It seems either terribly conventional and everyone's spouting the same language. There's no realness. Every person should have their own language of describing the wonderful way God in courtesy comes into their soul and interacts with them. That should be the most different kind of talk there is. But we all end up sounding the same, or she might have said, you all sound the same. Your God, it isn't God. I know that. But I'm not saying I know, it just means I know it's not yours. I haven't met God yet. That's what an agnostic, a faithful agnostic is. Often we use that for someone just lazy of mind, hasn't bothered to think it through and pay attention to experience. A true agnostic really wants to know, but doesn't know how. When she read St. Teresa of Avila's autobiography, suddenly that was someone who knew. And she knew that was God. Isn't that great? I don't know if you have a person like that in your life. But if you do have such a person, you never forget them. Something that Pope Benedict talked about, he was a real fan of Edith Stein. John Paul, his predecessor, John Paul II, would make Edith Stein, along with two 14th century women saints, Catherine of Siena and St. Bridget of Sweden, would make them co-patronesses of Europe, raising them to the highest level of notice, thinking, given what he saw happening in Europe with the faith and the loss and damaging to faith through the world wars and all that had gone on, that it seemed like those three saints had the most to say to the contemporary European scene. So he made them co-patronesses of Europe. Pope Benedict talked about Edith Stein in relation to suffering. And both Teilhard, her contemporary, and Edith Stein faced a Europe absolutely torn to shreds by war. First, there was the war to end all wars. And then, of course, there was another one. Because we just like war. I shouldn't be able to say that without bursting into tears, to be honest. But I guess I can. Pope Benedict puts it this way when he's talking about Edith. However, a difficult question remains, one I cannot answer at length at this moment. Why was it necessary to suffer to save the world? And he's referring to both Jesus, but also specifically to a very clear vocational mission Edith Stein felt to accept suffering and run towards it. It was necessary because there exists in the world an ocean of evil, of injustice, hatred, and violence. And the many victims of hatred and injustice have the right to see justice done. God cannot ignore the cries of the suffering who are oppressed by injustice. And here's a really important line, eloquent. It's like Benedict. I didn't like him much as Pope. It doesn't mean anything. It says probably more about me. But he had one of the clearest, most elegant minds, theological minds, that I've read. He was remarkable that way. To forgive is not to ignore, but to transform. To forgive is not to ignore, but to transform. Okay, a comment about Edith. You will see, and we will see, how there came a point where she's starting to be hunted by the Germans because of her Jewish background. So she had, at age 13, left Judaism behind because Judaism, I already told you, that there's a density to God in her perception as a 13-year-old girl, is all I'm saying. I'm not doing a critique of Judaism. For heaven's sakes, I could do it much better with Catholicism. You know what I'm saying? There's a density that gets in to the way we do these things. that can become more of an obstacle or just a huge mesh screen through which the pure grace of God freely given gets so, it's hard to get through. Okay? I'm saying this again, not to be catty or snarky, but so that we might think more deeply and find a way to see how important religion is when we understand what it actually is, the gift it brings us. Here's the deal. Why would Edith Stein, who entered the Carmelite monastery, so she's a Catholic nun with a different name now, gets hunted by the Gestapo and arrested in the Netherlands because of her last name and how they would trace lineage to find any stinking Jew. It was really incredibly vicious to find any you could find and hunt them down. Well, they wouldn't normally have gone after a Catholic, let alone a nun, at least at that time. But what happened is that the Belgian bishops, as they saw what was going on with the Nazi regime as it started to take over countries and start shipping Jews to concentration camps, amazingly, it's not very often we hear this, the Catholic bishops stood up and said, no, you will not do that. That is wrong. And so Hitler and the Nazis went right after and said, okay, all Catholics with any Jewish background at all, we're going to go get them because they're yours. And that's what caught up Edith Stein in her monastery. She had been sent there by the sisters to get her out of Germany. She didn't ask to go there. She was sent there. In those last years that she was in that monastery in the Netherlands, she wrote two of her most important works, one of which is an extremely difficult work on St. John of the Cross, the other great Carmelite mystic with Teresa, contemporaries and personal friends, who founded together the reform of the Carmelites. She wrote, it's a book called The Science of the Cross. She wrote it during that time. Why did she feel in herself, even as she with horror saw what the Nazis were doing, felt an absolute solidarity with her Jewish brothers and sisters and say, I'm not going to use my Catholicism and to get away from the fact that that's my root and stem. That's where I'm from. And these people are suffering, and I must go. And when the Gestapo burst into the monastery where she lived to grab her and her sister, they said, Heil Hitler! And she said in Latin, praise God, the Lord of all. Because all these things that are happening, it could even be in our own country, is all about sovereignty. Who is God? And people are always trying to usurp that role and say, I'm God. You will do what I tell you, or I will destroy you. It's about sovereignty. It always has been. The Chronicles of Narnia, every single novel in that great work is about disputed sovereignty between the original Narnia established by Aslan the Great Lion and other things that try to displace that sovereignty. So she's taken away with her sister, shipped by train to Birkenau, lands there one day. The next day, she, with all the other, is stripped naked and walked through into the bathhouse where they used, strikingly, the poison they used was what you used to exterminate rats. And that was the point. Not just any old poison will do. There was a young woman there by the name of Etty Hillesum. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Another amazing mystic woman. She was also in the same prison camp, and she, in one of her diaries, letters to her sister, describes having seen Edith Stein and her sister and the way they carried themselves, and was so moved, as many people were, by the dignity with which they faced this, this humiliation and then extermination. Evil wants to be noticed, and so it makes me nervous to spend time talking about it. But I think you need to know the world that she is in to experience why she became the woman she was and why she would lean towards terrible suffering on purpose. You remember with Teilhard when we talked about him, that one of the things that profoundly affected him, he never got clear of it, was how he found the glory of God in the trenches of hell itself. And what he found the glory of God was in the tenderness with its one soldier would look after another, or mourn the shattered body and dying body of a friend. These acts of beauty and love in hell just so startled Teilhard at an existential level that he never forgot that. How is God here? And in some ways, far more luminously here than if I go to Fred Meyer. There's something about that ultimate limit situation where the real beauty of a soul is revealed. Edith Stein sensed her vocation forced on her, it wasn't what she had chosen, was to go into hell itself with love. Not in rage, how dare you? If I had a gun, I'd shoot all of you. I wish I could blow the whole thing up. A lot of us talk like that. We have versions of that. We call it road rage or whatever we have. For her to go there in love and for love's sake, and to bring loving face to people so frightened, knowing they're being exterminated and humiliated, and show up there with a loving face. This is our vocation in the crucified Lord, who showed up that way with us. And we kind of balk at that. It seems a little bit frightening. We like to run from things that hurt us. So did she, but she overcame it with a conviction, I will go be love in hell. Think of it. Now, if you are a parent, you may know this. In a child, maybe at a time, or maybe forever, who was so intensely difficult for you, because you are truly lousy parents, because they're quick to remind you. And they're just so incredibly difficult. And you will not give up on them. You bring love in a hellish place. You have an analogy to what she's talking about in that experience. And if it hasn't been yours, you know people. I said, wow, I'm glad I didn't have a child like that. Because they're just so hard. One last thing about this dark chapter, just to get a sense of the systemic way that evil worked in the German nation and the Nazis. So there was Auschwitz 1, 2, and 3. The first one was a smaller camp that was for political prisoners from Poland and Germany. And it was simply incarceration. It was started by Himmler. He was the genius behind this. Then there was Auschwitz II, which was a massive institution. 300 barracks, all lined up in rows. It was a huge acreage, huge. And that was Birkenau. And its sole purpose was to exterminate. They had 5 huge, quote, bathhouses. They had other big buildings that they threw the bones and bodies in and just piled them up. The last piece was slave labor. Famous cynical comment on the gate. Working will set you free. Yeah, it will make you dead. That's the only way you're going to get free from it. The magnitude of evil must be seen and looked at frankly in order to understand why would Teilhard, right in the face of that, talk about the unconquerable glory of God working even in matter, in the very dirt and trees, to bring life. How would he ever get there? And dedicate his life to articulating it beautifully, poetically. Why would Edith Stein spend her life giving her life for people that she'd gotten a ticket to get away from? You're Christian. You're Catholic. Go to the United States or something. Get out of there. She had every good reason. She didn't do it. My vocation is to bring love into the heart of hell where suffering is. Can you imagine you terrified in a place like that, whether it be in Gaza or Israel, wherever it is? You're just terrified, death all around, lost your parents. And suddenly through the smoke comes a beautiful presence with a gorgeous smile and a gentle voice and says, "Dear one, do you hurt? Can I be of help to you?" It's so unexpected and so powerful. I still remember the morning of 9/11, and I was the superior at Jesuit High, which meant when that happened, I knew I was going to have one heck of a day. I knew it was going to be an incredibly significant day of not only finding a way to stabilize students, both ritually, but just by presence. And I knew there'd be parents who'd be scared to death and worried. All this, I knew it was going to be a heck of a day. Anyway, one of the things I regularly heard was someone like, "Where is God?" And I remember I was, as anyone in such a place of hell wonders, that question has a larger capacity to sort of catch your attention. And as you remember, it just went these endless loops of the same scenes over and over again on TV. Anyway, it was toward the end of the day, and I went in just to rest. It's just been a heck of a day. And I was watching some of it on TV, that I had missed, just to make sure I was aware of, whether the local McDonald's was still there or if that had been bombed. I mean, we didn't know how widespread this was going to be. And in my mind was, how do I answer that question to people genuinely asking, where is God? And I was watching as the footage of one of the towers as it crashed. Remember, just see huge dust clouds and noise. And as I was watching that horrible scene and people running, I saw coming right out of the clouds 3 firemen completely covered with that heavy dust that would probably kill all of them by now. They were all poisoned by that stuff. But they come out in the sort of this reverse delta form, the one in the middle and the 2 on the side, and they're coming out of the clouds of dust. And it just hit with such force. That was the Holy Trinity. Where else would they be? Where else would they be? Love goes to suffering. It doesn't run from it. That's what Edith Stein did. Worth a thought. Let me just check in for a second. Any comments? And Mary, you'll have to remind me if I forget to repeat it so that people can hear. Yeah. Any comments?
Have the same situation with the Gaza hospital. It's about evil, and who is that person who, like you're saying, where is God today? I'm sure there's probably doctors there, nurses there who are, giving their all in the possible situation. But, history keeps repeating.
One thing about evil is that it does repeat. It took me a long time to figure this out, but evil circles. Oh, so let me repeat so that those online understand. Her question was, we see evil present in the world right now, and in a war that all of us are seeing on the news all the time in Israel and Gaza, what's going on there. Who's there to be that kind of a presence? And we don't know because we're not there, but we do know they're there. And occasionally I am convinced I've heard those voices when I hear a doctor not filled with rage at those who are causing the harm, but they're totally focused on their patients. The voice is kind of serene. This is what the patients need. This is what we're here for. This is what we need to have. It's just a kind of an astonishing serenity when their focus is where it's supposed to be, when you'd think they could easily submit to rage or fear or frustration. It's an unexpected turn of things in people motivated in a way that surprises. Okay? I'd like to take a moment now to lean toward Edith Stein by letting you hear some of her sound, okay? I'm going to take a text here from work she did on education. Now, she's going to refer to it as religious education here, but there's a trap in that language. Really, there's only education. There's education that is sufficient, which means it takes into account everything that presents itself for consideration. And there's education that systematically leaves out important pieces of reality. and says, we can't talk about that. So to talk about religious education suggests it's a special kind of education. No, it's education that actually has openness to God, who made all things, who created the world, and worth knowing. If we're going to understand the world and who we are, it'd be good to know the maker and why God made and acted the way God did. So I'm nervous about the religious education. It really is an education that is available. And you kind of hear this in her. So it has a kind of technical feel, so I'll slow and I won't read a lot of it, but I want you to hear something of her sound because she spent a lot of her life trying to make sure that education included awareness of the soul, which means the deepest inner purpose of each person, where the greatest gifts of each person have their source. First, we will consider the goal of education. I'm now quoting her. Which form are we to give the material? Now, the material, she means students. We are to help form the children into God's children. Now, here's where slippage happens. So I want to ask you to be very careful here. It's what I said earlier, how quickly, when we think God's children, we think making them Catholic or making them Lutheran or making them Jewish or in other words, a particular religious shape. That's a huge mistake and has caused so much damage in history. The goal of the great religions is to make us like God, not like themselves. It's sort of like I'm going to build a house with a hammer so that the house looks like a hammer. So the point of religion is to open its people to the gracious presence of God who freely gives himself. That's the idea. So when we say God's children, we're not thinking, Hitler's used with a Christian taste. It's not social engineering. It's actually, especially with children who are fresh from God, my friend Lynn, a famous phrase that I've always loved, fresh from God. They already know God far more than we do. They just need to be taught by adults who maybe know something about it because they've been around longer. What do I do with this that I already know? They can't be turned into God's children when they already are God's children. That's the point. It's just the truth of things. But how to let them take the experiences they have and teach them what those mean, to set them free, to be joyous and confident in God. They are to be God-formed. In other words, they are to walk their life's journey in God's hand, unresistingly led by God's will. In other words, follow me. I know the way. I can show you this. And you might say, I know. You're the best there is. Happy to be. I just love that. Can't get over that feeling of God's hand. That automatically includes that this way will be the way of the imitation of Christ. That is God's way of being a human being. A human being completely and fiercely free, who can make a leper clean with a word or a touch, who can make someone who's crippled walk, who's been crippled from birth, someone who's blind to see. My gosh, this is what normal is supposed to be. But we don't believe it. It's actually what normal is supposed to be godlike, in the way Christ was godlike. He was enormously unimpressed with these incredible powers to just heal people with a word, or to walk out on the water in the middle of a storm. So he wasn't particularly impressed with that. He was enormously interested in what's your reaction to what you just saw happen. Who do you think is here? That's what he cared about. But darn it, we're supposed to be Christ-like, which means things he does is supposed to be kind of normal for us. And we don't think so. It's just worth remembering that. They are to take off their own selves and put on Christ, and be living members of the body of Christ, through which the supernatural life of this mystical body flows. Alter Christus, another Christ. That is the form which is the educational goal which is to be attained. Period. I think I mentioned this before, but I mention it in this context again. I would speak, let's say, because remember teaching your kids, I was a Jesuit high, and I remember there would be a meeting with new parents, or even if they were old parents, but they had a new freshman. So they were all there in the gym, the whole staff was closed. And I would talk to them, and I would say, and I meant it, I'd say, a Jesuit high, you just need to know, we do not teach mathematics, we do not teach history, or religion, or English, none of it. No. We teach your kids, and we use those disciplines to help us teach them. If a teacher thinks the goal of his or her craft is to teach a subject, education is already damaged. You teach persons how to be persons, and to expose them to a mathematician like Euclid, who's far greater than they are. And it only takes a few moments working with one of his puzzles to figure out, God, this guy's smart. I'm not Euclid. Well, you could be, because he shared all he learned with you. That's why we're here. So that his depth of life in this particular discipline can call you out into greater depth and thinking in you. We're teaching you, not a subject. And that's what she's saying in education. We're teaching children to be what they are. God's children, sent at the perfect time to be light. Children showing up just on time. I saw a newborn today, a picture of a brand new set of parents sent their little one, a little girl, lying on the breast of his mother. They were both so luminous. It was beautiful to see newborn parents. And as I looked, as I often do with little ones, I wonder if that's the one. I wonder if that's the one sent just in time to help save us from ourselves. Is that a Taylor Swift with a beautiful gift for music that has the ability to communicate something that people are really moved by? Is that a great physicist? Is that our future president? Why shouldn't we think like that? Every little one, fresh from God, a profound mystery, perfectly on time. Why shouldn't we think of that? This is God's children. And that's what we're meant to teach children how to embrace and understand. Because, pray God, we understand. We know we have souls. We know what the soul's powers are. We've trained them. We know what virtue is. We know the names of the virtues. We know what each one, the kinds of strength it builds into a soul, and know how to teach it when it's timely. we're entrusted to teach God's children, to be God's children, what they are. It's a beautiful thing. She hammers this. Oh my goodness. I'm so glad it's part 1, part 2. Give me just a sec. Okay, I'm going to leave it this way. This will be my last thought. One of the things that captivated Edith Stein, that was actually alive in the intellectual tradition in Germany under the name of phenomenology, a particular kind of philosophy, was an insight that before there's me and then there's you, and what's our relationship? Before any otherness happens, there's a we already there. One playful way I have of putting it is that to wonder about who am I, it took me decades to figure out that was the wrong question. And I thought it was an important question, maybe the question. Who am I? There is no I. It's a complete abstraction. We have always been from the beginning and will always be a we. The question is not who am I, but whose am I? To whom do we belong? If we know that, we know who we are. And the I is a deliberate intellectual game to pull ourselves out as a special object, disconnected, and then spend years of philosophy filling library shelves with books, trying to describe how we're connected to everything else. No, before the I and thou, there was a we. There is a fellow feeling. When you see babies lying in the Gaza hospital, you don't run to your mind and say, okay, a baby shape. I know what a baby is, define baby. I know what it is. Okay, and there's one lying there. Your heart goes out to them. You feel a connection already. Or when you see people suffering, you just feel hurt. You feel there's a we that's happening there before we don't even know them, but we do. We feel that. Empathy, sympathy. What is that connection before the subtleties of I and thou and them and us? That's what she was investigating, because she felt that was where we're going to find the way the experience of God has gotten in the world and woven us before we got smart enough to figure out how we're all different. You see? So I want to leave you with this thought. In this connection, which we can call intersubjectivity, there appears the fact that we can feel for each other. This is just one paragraph, and then I'll be done. I'll say a prayer and we're out of here. Mary's over there going like this. No, it matters to me always that I respect that we start on time and that we end on time, okay? So here's the paragraph. This is another thinker, but he's talking about what Stein, and he just does it in a particular way that I think is so helpful. In contrast, psychic contagion and emotional identification have a vital rather than an intentional basis. So I don't decide what I'm going to feel, I just feel. The problem is that pre-articulate just feel of connection is highly available to distortion, to a kind of contagion. For example, we recognize today of rage. and discontent. Even people who should look at their lives with every reason to be grateful to be alive and for the gifts in their life find themselves filled with rage and unsettled and angry. There's a psychic contagion that comes from that very base level where we're all connected and we feel like the aspen tree that's all connected in its roots. It's all one plant. She saw how that affected Germany. The discontent and rage that was distilled by a few people, and it was contagious. Psychic contagion is a matter of sharing another's emotion without adverting to the object of emotion. I might not have a reason to be rageful. I just am. And it feels good. You think you're angry? I'm angry too. It's all disconnected from particular objects of reason. Okay, I'm going to leave you with that thought. Perhaps that's why her very first thinking was around empathy. How is that connection? What are the rules of that? We need to be more aware of it because it's affecting our reason. Let me just pause for a second and say a prayer. Through the intercession of Edith Stein, Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, may we gain at least the desire for the desire to move into suffering with a loving heart instead of run from it and protect ourselves from it. Teach us the wisdom of the cross, dear Lord, and make us more courageous and fierce in the light that has been poured forth in us by the Holy Spirit. Amen. Mary, come on forward. I don't think so. Oh, that's great.
Okay. I'll try this without
Gracie and Al.
moving it too much so that it doesn't cut out. Thank you for being here. There's more pretzels and wine and all on the side if you would like to stay. Thank you to those of you online. Wonderful to have you here as well. And this coming Sunday, I think most of you know because I've been sending out reminders, but we have our fireside gathering at Amatera Winery. It's our annual gathering of friends and supporters just to celebrate this year of the Faber Institute and to help donate and fund the Faber Institute for the coming year. It's a lovely gathering. And if you are here locally, if those of you online are local and would like to come, please do. And then next month, as Father Gian said, we'll have our part 2 of Edith Stein, which will be great because we got a taste tonight and we'll get to continue on. That's the second Tuesday of the month.
So
again,
again.
Yeah, again, early because of the holidays. Between now and then, we also have our Faber sessions, which we've been going through the Chronicles of Narnia, but this time for December, since we'll be in the Advent season, we'll be reading and discussing some Christmas carols, which is always lovely. I think we did that last year. We've done it before and it's just wonderful. So join us if you can. I'll send out reminders tomorrow and feel free to stay and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Sometimes the mouse on the laptop just kind of freezes
Oh, really?
and then I can't.